The tires of my rental car crunched over the gravel driveway just after 7 on a Thursday evening in late October. The Nashville sky had gone that deep, bruised purple I used to love, the kind that settles over the hills right before the temperature drops. I'd been in Atlanta for 4 days, closing a licensing deal that had taken the better part of 6 months to negotiate, and the only thought keeping me moving through that airport, through that gate, through the turbulence over Kentucky, was getting home to my daughter. I had promised Mia I would be back in time to read her the next chapter of the book we had started together. She was 5, and she took promises seriously. I had learned to take them seriously, too. The house was lit up from the inside, warm gold rectangles spilling onto the front lawn. I remember thinking for one small, still moment that it looked like a postcard, like the life I had worked so hard to build. I pulled my suitcase out of the trunk and heard it before I reached the front porch. Music. Not the soft background kind Marcus put on when he was cooking dinner, but something louder, with a beat underneath it, the kind you play when you're not thinking about a sleeping 5-year-old down the hall. I didn't knock. It was my house. The living room hit me like a wave. Candles on the coffee table. My good ones, the ones I kept for special occasions, wine glasses half full, a charcuterie board spread across the ottoman I had driven 40 minutes to an antique market to find. And there, on my couch, sitting close enough that her shoulder was against his, was my best friend Jessica. My husband Marcus looked up first. He smiled. It was the wrong kind of smile, the one that comes just a half-second too late. "Hey," he said, standing. "I thought your flight was tomorrow." It was moved up. I set my suitcase down carefully. My voice came out even, which surprised me. "Where's Mia?" Jessica reached for her wine glass with the kind of practiced calm that told me she had rehearsed for this moment. She was being a little fussy earlier. Marcus put her down. I looked at the clock on the wall, 7:14. Mia's bedtime was 8. She hadn't been put down early in months, not since she'd gone through that phase of night terrors last spring. "She's fine," Marcus said. "You know how she gets when she's overtired. She gets overtired when no one pays attention to her." I thought it, but didn't say it. I turned and walked down the hallway to her room. The door was closed. I opened it slowly, the way I always did, and the room was dark. Mia was on her bed. But she wasn't asleep. She was sitting up against the headboard, knees pulled to her chest, her stuffed rabbit pressed to her mouth the way she did when she was trying very hard not to cry. Her cheeks were tracked with dried tears, and the nightlight had been turned off. She was afraid of the dark. She had been afraid of the dark for as long as she could remember, and every single person in this house knew that. "Mama." Her voice broke on the word, small and cracked, and so relieved it knocked the breath straight out of me. I crossed the room and 3 steps and sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her into my arms. And she grabbed onto me with both hands and cried in that silent, shaking way that means a child has already been crying for a long time. I held her and rocked her and told her I was there. I was right there. I had her. When she could talk, she told me. Jess had been there all afternoon. Mia had wanted to show Marcus the drawing she'd made at school, and Marcus had told her not now. They were busy. She had knocked twice more. The third time, she said, Jess had come into the hallway and told her in a voice Mia described as not nice, that big girls learn to entertain themselves. Marcus had sent her to her room. He had turned the nightlight off before he closed the door because the bulb, he said, was bothering him through the gap underneath. My daughter had sat alone in the dark for 2 hours while my husband and my best friend lit candles in my living room and opened my wine. I felt something happen inside me, not the dramatic shattering people describe in movies. It was quieter than that. More like a door swinging shut and the lock sliding home. Clean. Final. I got Mia into her pajamas, turned the nightlight back on, and sat with her until her breathing went slow and even. I kissed her forehead and stood up. Then I went back down the hallway. Marcus and Jess were in the kitchen. She was washing the wine glasses. He was leaning against the counter talking. They looked like a couple in a television commercial for dish soap. "She's asleep," Marcus said. "See, nothing to worry about. She was sitting alone in the dark for 2 hours. My voice was still level. I was amazed at myself. She's terrified of the dark. You both know that. Jessica set a glass on the drying rack. Lauren, she's 5. She needs to learn that she can't interrupt adult time every 10 minutes. Adult time. I looked at the candles still burning on the coffee table. I looked at the charcuterie board, the wine, the closeness of two people who had been very comfortable together in a house where they had assumed they would not be interrupted. Both of you need to leave, I said. Marcus straightened up. Excuse me. This is my house. I pay the mortgage. You need to leave tonight, both of you. What followed was the kind of argument I will not spend words on because none of it mattered. Marcus said I was overreacting. Marcus said I was paranoid. Marcus said I had a problem with Jess because I was jealous of how naturally she and Mia got along, which struck me as perhaps the most audacious thing a man had ever said to me. Jess said she was my best friend, and she was worried about me. Jess said she had only ever been there for me. The word manipulation floated through my mind with a kind of clinical clarity. I went upstairs, packed a bag for Mia and a bag for myself, and carried my sleeping daughter to the car. She stirred when I buckled her in, murmured something about rabbits, and went back under. I backed down the driveway. Marcus stood in the doorway watching. I did not look at him. I drove to a residence inn on the east side of the city, the kind of place with a small kitchen and a separate bedroom, anonymous and clean and completely unknown to anyone in my life. I had booked it on my business account before I even reached the interstate. Once Mia was settled in the bedroom, I sat in the chair by the window and called Daniel Holt. Daniel had been my company's outside counsel for 3 years before I'd had any reason to need a family law attorney. When I'd had reason, 6 months earlier, a disagreement about finances that Marcus and I had smoothed over, or thought we had, Daniel had given me a referral. I had the number saved. I don't know why I had never deleted it. I was glad I hadn't. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything, concisely the way I had learned to present information in boardrooms. The evening, Mia in the dark. The pattern of small dismissals I had noticed over the past year and chosen to explain away. When I finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. Are you in a safe location? Yes. A hotel. He doesn't know where. Good. Keep it that way. Do not communicate with him tonight. Not a text, not an email, nothing. I know that feels impossible, but everything he sends you from this point forward is evidence, and everything you send him is potentially evidence too. Let him write. Let him panic. You document and you stay silent. He'll call my office. Let him. Brief your assistant in the morning. Tell her to log every contact and route it to me. Lauren, I want to file a petition for emergency temporary custody first thing tomorrow. We also need to talk about your financials. Shared accounts? Joint checking. But my business accounts are separate. Move what you need from the joint account to a personal account first thing tomorrow morning. Not everything. That can look bad. Enough to cover 3 months of expenses for you and your daughter. Document it. We'll say it was to ensure stability for the child during a separation, which is true. I took a breath. Okay. You're going to be all right, Daniel said. I've seen a lot of these. The ones who act quickly and stay quiet when you already did the hardest part. After I hung up, I sat for a long time in the dark of that hotel room, listening to Mia breathe through the open door. My phone lit up on the side table. Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. It lit up again. Then again. Then it was text messages, arriving in bursts the way they do when someone is typing and deleting and typing again. Lauren, this is insane. Come home and talk to me like an adult. I can't believe you took Mia. Do you know how crazy that looks? She is going to be confused when she wakes up and isn't in her own bed. You're doing this to her, not to me. Fine, don't answer. But Jess is really hurt by what you said to her. She has done nothing but support you for 10 years. Lauren, I swear to God, if you don't respond, I'm calling the police. I took a screenshot of each message, attached them to an email, and sent them to Daniel with a single line, first wave, beginning the documentation. Then I put my phone face down and did not touch it again. In the morning, Mia woke up disoriented for about 45 seconds, then announced that the hotel bed was bouncy and asked if there was a waffle maker. I found a diner 2 blocks away. She had chocolate chip pancakes and talked about her rabbit and about a boy at school named Owen who kept stealing her crayons, and for 35 minutes the world was manageable. My assistant Kim had worked with me for 4 years and did not ask a single unnecessary question when I called her. I told her the situation in 2 sentences. She said, "I've got it. What do you need?" I told her to log every contact from Marcus and route it to Daniel's office, and that if Marcus appeared in person, she was to call building security and document the incident. She said, already thinking the same thing. I told her I had always been glad I hired her. She said, "I know, get through this." The first week was a controlled kind of chaos. Daniel filed the emergency custody petition. The judge granted temporary primary custody to me, with supervised visitation for Marcus pending a full hearing, citing the incident with Mia and the pattern of one-sided financial contribution to the household. Marcus's attorney, a man named Gary Briggs, who Daniel described, not unkindly, as someone who had peaked professionally in 2009, immediately filed a counter-petition alleging that I had removed the child from the family home without consent and was attempting to alienate her from her father. Standard playbook, Daniel told me. They're going to try to paint you as a controlling, work-obsessed mother who wasn't present enough. Let them build that case, because while they're building it, we're going to introduce some information that will make Gary Briggs wish he had advised his client to settle on day one. I didn't know yet what that information was. I would find out. Jessica sent me 3 texts in those first days. The first was apologetic in a way that was actually accusatory. "I'm sorry you felt uncomfortable. I would never hurt Mia. You know me." The second was colder. "I think you should really examine why you've always had a problem with people being close to Marcus." The third came 2 days later at 11 at night and said simply, "You're going to regret this." I forwarded all 3 to Daniel and blocked her number. What I had not expected was the call from my mother. She lived in Knoxville and we spoke every Sunday. She called on a Wednesday, which already told me something. Her voice had that careful, picked clean quality it got when she was saying something she had rehearsed. "Lauren," Marcus called me. I know he would. "He's very upset. He says you just left. He says you won't talk to him. He says you're keeping Mia from him for no reason." "Did he tell you what no reason was?" She paused. "He said there was some misunderstanding with Jessica. He left our 5-year-old daughter sitting alone in the dark for 2 hours because he was entertaining his girlfriend in my living room." A longer pause. "He said she was just a friend." "Mom." I kept my voice steady. "I know what I saw. I know what Mia told me. I need you to decide whether you're going to take my side on this or his, because I don't have the capacity right now to manage someone else's opinion of my choices." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called. I love you." "What do you mean?" She came to Nashville that weekend and stayed with Mia while I met with Daniel. That was the meeting where he showed me what he had found. He slid a printed spreadsheet across the table. I looked at it without understanding it at first. Then I looked at it again. It was a credit line, opened 18 months ago, attached to the LLC I had formed when I started my consulting business. My business. My name on the filing, my EIN, my registered agent. Except, I had not opened this credit line. I had not applied for it, had not signed for it, had not known it existed. The balance was $240,000. "How?" I said. The word came out very flat. "Marcus had power of attorney over your business accounts for a 7-month period 2 years ago, when you had your gallbladder surgery and were recovering. You granted it temporarily and apparently never formally revoked it. An oversight. He used it to add himself as an authorized officer on the LLC, which gave him the standing to open the line of credit." I stared at the document. "Where did the money go?" Daniel turned to the next page. "A company called Harlow Creative Partners, LLC, registered in Delaware, operating address in Nashville. The sole officer is Jessica Harlow." The name landed like a key turning in a lock. I heard the click of it. "He funded her company," I said. With my credit line. Across 14 months. Regular transfers, structured to stay under reporting thresholds. The most recent one was 11 days ago, 3 days before you came home from Atlanta. I sat very still. I thought about the past 18 months. The small business Jessica had started. The boutique consulting and events firm she talked about constantly. The one that seemed to generate a lot of Instagram content and very little actual revenue. I had never thought to ask how she funded it. She was my best friend. I had celebrated with her at the launch party. I had shared her posts. "This is fraud," I said. "This isn't just a divorce. This is fraud." "Yes," Daniel said, "which means this is no longer just my phone call to make. I've already reached out to a contact at the FBI field office in Nashville. White-collar financial crimes. They want to meet with you tomorrow." The FBI meeting was precise and unsettling in the way that anything that begins with federal agents and a conference table tends to be. There were two of them. A quiet man named Torres and a woman named Price who asked questions in a way that felt like she already knew the answers and was checking whether I did too. I told them everything I knew. I was careful to distinguish clearly between what I had observed, what I had been told, and what the documents showed. Price seemed to appreciate that. "The structure is consistent with what we see in cases involving business credit fraud," she told me before I left. "The amounts, the timing, the use of an authorized officer addition. Ms. Harlow's company also appears in 2 other ongoing investigations we can't speak to directly. We'll be in touch." Marcus did not know about the FBI. Gary Briggs certainly did not know about the FBI. Gary Briggs certainly did not know about the FBI. They were still operating under the impression that this was a garden-variety contested divorce with a custody dispute at the center, which meant that when Gary filed his motion for an urgent hearing, arguing that I had alienated Mia from her father and was psychologically destabilizing the child through the disruption of the move, they walked into that courtroom expecting a fight about parenting time. Daniel let them build their opening for 12 full minutes. Gary talked about Marcus's devotion to his daughter, his active presence in her daily life, his distress at being separated from her without cause. Marcus sat at the table looking worn in a way that might have read as genuine grief if I had not spent 8 years learning the precise texture of his performances. He kept his eyes on the judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Calloway, who had short gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away. When Gary finished, Judge Calloway looked at Daniel. "Mr. Holt." "Thank you, Your Honor." Daniel didn't stand the way Gary had. He stayed seated, almost casual. "We have a few things to address. The first is a forensic accounting review of my client's business financials, which we'd like to enter into evidence." He had the documents delivered to the clerk. I watched Gary Briggs's posture change as the packet landed in front of him. Just slightly. The way a man's shoulders move when he reads something he wasn't prepared to read. "Your Honor, this documentation shows a credit line totaling $240,000 opened in my client's name without her knowledge, using a power of attorney that had been granted temporarily during a medical recovery and never intended as a permanent instrument. The funds were transferred systematically over 14 months to a company owned and operated by a third party who was, during the same period, in a personal relationship with Mr. Sterling." He paused. Not for effect. Daniel wasn't that theatrical. He paused because he wanted the judge to finish reading the summary page. "We also have," Daniel continued, "a brief audio recording, with the court's permission." Gary was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. We have not been provided any notice. The recording was obtained during an unsolicited visit made by Ms. Harlow to my client's residence 2 days after my client vacated the marital home. Ms. Harlow initiated contact. My client did not. The recording is relevant to establish both the nature of the relationship between Mr. Sterling and Ms. Harlow and to a specific statement Ms. Harlow made regarding her intentions in these proceedings." Judge Calloway looked at Gary with the expression of a woman who had been doing this for a long time. "I'll allow it. Proceed." "I had been in my second-floor apartment at the Residence Inn when Jess had shown up. She had gotten the address from the front desk by telling them she was my sister. I had learned that later. At the time, I had only known that our face was on the intercom screen and that my first instinct had been to call Daniel. His phone had gone to voicemail. I had made a different call in the 45 seconds while Jess pressed the buzzer again. I had called Kim, told her to stay on the line, set my phone in my blazer pocket with the speaker running, and buzzed Jess in. She had been agitated in a way I had rarely seen her. The controlled, glossy quality she usually moved through the world with had cracked at the edges. She told me I was destroying Marcus. She told me I was vindictive, and that I had always had a problem sharing his time, his attention, his life. She told me that the business loan had been Marcus's idea, yes, but that he had genuinely believed I wouldn't mind once things were more stable, and that it wasn't as if I needed the money. She told me specifically that if I continued to pursue this in court, she would testify that I had been emotionally absent for the entirety of our marriage and that Mia had consistently shown more comfort and attachment with Marcus and with Jess than with me. She said she had receipts. She said she knew how to present herself in front of a judge. In the courtroom, the recording played. When it was over, Judge Calloway removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Marcus for a long moment. I had not looked at him during the proceeding. Daniel had told me not to, but I looked at him now because I wanted to see. His face was the color of old paper. He had his hands flat on the table in front of him as if to keep himself from sliding off the chair. "Mr. Briggs," the judge said, "your client's associate has just stated on a recorded call her intention to commit perjury in these proceedings in exchange for a favorable outcome in the matter of marital assets. I'll be noting this in the record." She turned to Daniel. "Mr. Barrio." She turned to Daniel. "Holt, am I correct in understanding that the federal financial crimes matter is active? Agents Torres and Price from the Nashville FBI field office confirmed as recently as yesterday that the investigation is ongoing and that Mr. Purdock, Sterling, is a person of interest." A sound came from Marcus's side of the room that wasn't quite a word. "I'm going to make this straightforward," Judge Calloway said. "Emergency temporary custody is awarded to the petitioner. Visitation rights for the respondent are suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation and a psychological evaluation. All marital assets and business accounts are frozen, with the exception of the accounts designated for the petitioner's operating expenses, as filed in the motion I approved this morning." She picked up her pen. "Motion for joint custody is denied. Motion for emergency visitation is denied. Motion for emergency visitation is denied. Mr. Briggs, I suggest you advise your client to cooperate fully with federal authorities, because obstruction at this stage will make everything that comes next significantly worse." The gavel came down. Outside in the hallway, Daniel walked beside me toward the elevator without speaking until the courtroom doors were closed behind us. Then he said, "That went better than I expected, and I had expected it to go well." I pressed the elevator button. What happens now? Federal case moves on its own timeline. We wait. In the meantime, we prepare for the final divorce and custody determination. Marcus's attorney is going to want to settle. The federal charges change the calculation entirely. A convicted felon arguing for custody of a 5-year-old is not a winning position. And the money. We pursue civil recovery in addition to any restitution ordered in the criminal matter. You will get most of it back. Not all, possibly, but most. The house was in your name. The business was in your name. His financial contribution to the marriage, as we'll demonstrate, was primarily drawn from assets that were yours to begin with." He paused. "Lauren, you did the right things at every step. You left when it mattered. You documented. You didn't engage. I thought about Mia at the diner that morning, pressing her finger into the syrup on her plate and making small circles. I thought about the sound of her breathing in the hotel room. I thought about what it had felt like to find her in the dark. I did what I had to do," I said. "That's not the same thing as the right things." He looked at me for a moment. "Sometimes it is," he said. The following weeks were a particular kind of waiting that I had not experienced before. The world continued its ordinary business. I had client calls, Mia had school, Kim sent me the daily log of everything that had come in and been routed appropriately. But underneath all of it was the low-frequency hum of something large moving slowly toward conclusion. Marcus sent one more text from a number I didn't recognize, 3 weeks after the hearing. It said only, "I made a mistake. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it once." I read it standing at the kitchen counter of the furnished apartment I had moved us into, in a neighborhood with good schools and a park 2 blocks away where Mia had already staked a claim on a particular swing. I read it twice, then I set the phone down and finished making her lunch and didn't think about it again until much later that night when she was asleep and the apartment was quiet and I let myself feel, for about 10 minutes, the full weight of 8 years ending. Then I got up and washed the dishes and went to bed. The federal indictment came down on a Tuesday. I heard about it from Daniel before I saw the news coverage. Marcus was charged with wire fraud, unauthorized use of business credit, and conspiracy. Jess was charged alongside him, facing 3 counts including the conspiracy charge and a separate charge related to her company's use of the funds in a scheme that, it turned out, touched several other investors beyond just the money funneled from my credit line. The combined alleged fraud exceeded $600,000. I watched the local news segment from my phone in a coffee shop near Kim's office. There was a brief clip of Marcus being led out of the house we had shared, wearing a gray jacket I had helped him pick out at a department store the previous Christmas. He kept his head down. Jess, in the background, was shouting at someone I couldn't see. She looked like a woman who had believed, until about 45 minutes ago, that she was exempt from consequences. Marcus's attorney contacted Daniel a week later. The offer was a complete consent divorce, full legal and physical custody to me, no visitation claim pending the federal matter, and voluntary execution of a civil judgment for the amount of the fraudulently obtained credit. In exchange, Daniel was to communicate to the government that Marcus had been cooperative with us throughout the proceedings, which was almost entirely false, but was also the kind of phrasing that cost nothing. Daniel advised me to take it. I took it. The final hearing was administrative in the most complete sense. Marcus appeared via video from the county jail, wearing the clothes people wear when they are no longer managing their image. When the judge asked if he agreed to the terms, he said yes in a voice with nothing underneath it. The whole proceeding took less than 8 minutes. I drove back to Mia's school to pick her up and sat in the parking lot for a little while before I went in. The sky over Nashville was that same deep October color it had been on the night I had come home and found everything changed. But it looked different from a parking lot than it did from a driveway. Everything looked different when you were somewhere by choice. Mia came out carrying a painting, both hands holding it carefully away from her body the way she always did when she didn't want to smear it. She had painted what appeared to be a very tall orange house with a purple door and a tree with an enormous pink cloud of blossoms. She told me it was our new apartment. "But I made the tree bigger," she said, "because our tree is actually kind of small." I held the painting carefully and told her it was perfect. She said she knew. 6 months later, on a Saturday, when the dogwood in the new yard of the actual house we had moved into was doing exactly what Mia had predicted and covered itself in pink, I stood at the kitchen window with coffee and listened to her talking to the rabbit, whose name had recently changed from Mr. calling to the rabbit, whose name had recently changed from Mr. Buttons to Captain Buttons due to what Mia described as a promotion. Kim had sent a news link the night before. Sentencing had been handed down. Marcus received 4 years with eligibility for early release pending good behavior. Jess received 2 years and substantial fines, the kind that would follow her for a long time. The headline described the scheme in 3 sentences, reduced it to numbers and names, and moved on to the next story the way news does. I had read it once and closed the tab. The thing people who have not been through this tend to ask, when they ask anything, is whether you feel like yourself again after. Whether you get back to who you were. I had not understood the question when someone first asked it. I understood it better now. The answer was no, but not in the way the question assumed. The person I had been before that October evening was someone who moved through the world with a particular kind of unchecked trust, not naive exactly, but unguarded in the specific place that mattered most. I was not that person anymore. I was someone more careful. Someone who had learned without wanting to that the most dangerous betrayals are not the dramatic ones you see coming, but the slow, ordinary ones that assemble themselves in your own living room while you're out working. I did not think this was worse. I thought it was truer. Mia came in through the back door with grass on her knees and Captain Buttons tucked under one arm, asking if we could make grilled cheese for lunch. I said yes. She climbed onto the kitchen stool and watched me get out the bread and the butter, narrating each step to the rabbit in a serious, instructional tone, explaining that this was how cheese got melted properly. I listened to her talk and worked at the stove, and the kitchen smelled like butter and spring coming through the open window, and I did not think about the past at all. There was too much right in front of me. There always had been. I just needed to clear the room to see it.